just how formidable, from the outside looking in, when you look at Israel and Palestine, how formidable an enemy are the Palestinians up against?
A very formidable enemy.
Why?
I think largely because Israel has the support of the West in terms of military power. They also have the sanction, which is a terrible sanction, of impunity. The West allows them to do as they will because of the guilt that exists with respect to the history of the Holocaust. But the Holocaust was not waged by Palestinian people. So why must they bear the consequence of that terrible act? So I think the West needs to free itself of this notion that you can actually act in an inhumane way toward another people because we acted inhumanely toward you. The Palestinians have become the victim of the history of the Holocaust and of this fear that the West has of acknowledging the terrible deeds that were committed against Jewish people in Europe. So I believe that the West needs to embrace the notion that all persons are deserving of freedom and human rights, no matter who they are. And at the moment, it has been that Israeli people or people of Jewish extraction are deserving, but Palestinians are not. And I think it's linked to a great degree, both to this impunity I've referred to, but also to a very, I think, evil manifestation of Islamophobia that exists in the North. And so if you have a character that is of a Muslim faith, in some way you're less than human and less worthy of consideration in terms of protection. And I think all these aspects, these elements are mixed together in a really terrible mix that brings this catastrophic situation to the Palestinian people.
And you mentioned Islamophobia, and you mentioned sort of the white gaze and how it sees Muslims and Arabs. One of the turning points in apartheid, and actually took a while for it to turn, but when we like to think about apartheid, one of the turning points was 1976 and the Soweto riots. And obviously it was a devastation crime of the white police on black students. And it did start turning the corner just a little bit in terms of national sort of support and solidarity. How is it that something, a very grave crime by the white police that killed lots of black students, was able to turn the opinion a little bit, and yet we have now an entire enclave that's been besieged for 16, 17 years. Right now, for the last year, it's under massive siege, massive bombardment. There's been more explosives, more bombs dropped on it than any other place, including in World War II. How is it that this has just been allowed to go on? You and your country have led a case of genocide against Israel. The court has asked for Israel to act responsibly, not to stop short of a ceasefire. And that was 9 months ago. Is the Holocaust and Islamophobia enough to explain this? Or like what's going on?
Well, I think people are not regarded as equal. I think there's a lot of racism attached to it, a lot of double standard in the practice of international relations. And I think that the world has developed an attitude that some people matter and others don't. And this is a large part of the problematic that we face in the world today. But I think it's important to point out, as I said earlier, while there are parallels, there are distinctions. We had a very weighty, organized form, the African National Congress, a liberation movement, and others, AZAPO, PAC, but ANC was the leader, essentially. Now, what the ANC did was refine the political strategy quite significantly. So you had different aspects to it. There was the international dimension, which helped to support boycott and sanctions and isolation. Then you had the mass mobilization, which was internal, and the people, the majority, would act on the basis of campaigns that came out of the international domain of the struggle. So mass mobilization was very significant. I don't know to what degree there's a leadership in Palestine that can mobilize the masses in a similar fashion. You also had then the underground, which was very, very important. Resources could be brought in to ensure that the mass mobilization actually gets off the ground, that you get the pamphlets out, that people are protesting, they're aware that there will be a stay away for a particular week. So that underground was very, very important. And I think we often neglect to associate that underground movement with what occurred in 1976. So while 1976 and the student uprising was organic, you had cells throughout South Africa, and there's much archival material that indicates there was communication, exchange of ideas, there were instructions coming through. So the underground network was extremely important, and it linked in with the international solidarity movement. Then the fourth element is, of course, armed struggle. So with our struggle, there was quite an organized aspect to it. You know, there was structure, there was form, there was ideology, there was strategy and tactics. And I think we need to see similar levels of organization and thought about this is a struggle, it's very complex, very difficult, there's an enemy, very sophisticated, supported by powerful forces. How do you secure similar levels of support?
Don't you think, though, that, I mean, obviously I have the greatest respect for the freedom struggle. It gave me my freedom. And yes, when I look at how the ANC organized themselves, I'm often blown away by the tact, the sophistication, the sense of solidarity, the ability to act strategically. But fundamentally, the Palestinians are just up against something completely different. You mentioned international aid and help to the organization. Most organizations now that try to help Palestinians, especially an organization that could be as lethal to the objectives of Israel as the ANC was to the objectives of apartheid, would probably be deemed illegal or terrorist or something of that sort. Obviously people in South Africa were detained, they were killed, they were assassinated. The level of assassination of leadership, the assassination of young students, people who could potentially grow up. Just how do you think that plays into what is perceived as the inability of the Palestinians to organize themselves strategically?
Well, I think it plays in. I don't have sufficient knowledge to really, fully analyze it. But drawing on our own experience and observing and working closely with comrades in Palestine, I do think there is inadequate organizational thought. There are too many factions. Civil society is not working in a coherent manner. And I think sometimes international aid is actually a source of division. So I do think there needs to be thought about how all the forces could be marshaled together. And I believe this is a moment where that might happen. But what are the reasons for the level of harm that we're seeing? I think they derive largely from the fact that we allowed 1991 Iraq to happen. The beginnings of a license for immorality lie in that period. And over several decades, there's developed a notion that might is right and that you can do what you want against a group, a people, a country. Terror, you can label terrorist, particularly if it's in the Middle East region. Also linked is the fact that with our struggle, our neighborhood was with us. With the Palestinian people, there's no Botswana, there isn't a Lesotho, there isn't a Namibia, there isn't a Zimbabwe. We had all of them, and they protected us. They gave us exile, they gave us opportunity to organize, and they were very ready to have the parcel bombs of the apartheid state. They didn't throw us out when that happened. So I think the notion of the neighborhood and its support and the regional organizations, the Organization of African Unity made very clear decisions about isolating the apartheid state. And so countries in Africa would not allow, most of them, there were one or two who breached, but in the main, our neighborhood had our back. And this is not the case with the people of Palestine. And yet, they live in a very powerful neighborhood that could have a massive impact on their search for freedom.